Hey guys, welcome to Friday Night Bible Study through the book of Romans, verse by verse. Now we're in chapter 3, and if I wanted to throw a title on this, it's the Romans Road to Salvation. Now, that was, if you are old enough, because I don't know if they are still around, but when, but there was an organization that used to print what they call tracts, these little pamphlets that they were used for witnessing. Some told stories, some would give scripture. Okay, and oftentimes they would have what was called, once you would read, like you would read whatever the message, a gospel message, right? And then they would have a scripture that would they would call the Romans Road to Salvation. So various different scriptures through the book of Romans, starting with that you are a sinner and then Jesus died for you, you believe, you confess, and then you pray. Um, and what is typically called praying the sinner's prayer. Praying the sinner's prayer. And so, and then people would lead you in that. Okay. I'm going to adopt the phrase as we study through Romans, because in a sense we could say systematically we are going through the Romans, road to salvation. Now, our first, where we are here is we are talking about, and we're in Romans chapter 3, but we're talking about why we need to be saved. And that's important. I responded to a Facebook posting, and the Facebook posting said, uh, if I don't sin, then Jesus died for nothing. Now, these kinds of postings I engage. If you're not that type, then you probably won't engage. And I would say just scroll past. Typically, this seems to be around a lot of young atheists, people you can even say who have deconstructed from the Christian faith. Some you may even say lost their faith. I would challenge the notion if they were ever saved, because a lot of the reasons for deconstructing people is it usually kind of sums up they just don't like God, or they don't like the representation of the traditional denominational church. In other words, they've been raised a certain way, so what they have come to be, how they were taught Christianity is, and so they are pushing back against that. And so now you have people who are coming up with these little quirks, okay, these little quirks, uh, and that was one of them. That if I don't sin, Jesus died for nothing, and I believe I heard her before, but she has some other quirks, okay, that that they like to throw out. Now, the reason why I bring that up, the reason why I brought that up was, excuse me, um, the notion when she said, "If I don't sin," so that's a religious mind that she has. And to me, that she, that's her religious mind that she's kind of pushing back against. The problem with that, the problem with her um, making the statement like that, it kind of shows ignorance of what Scripture actually says. In other words, why do we need to be saved? And that's important. Why do we need to be saved? So we went back and we looked at the statement where all are under sin. So what does that mean, that all are under sin? Well, all are under sin because of Adam. That Adam sinned, and we're gonna get more into that later in chapter 5. But all are under sin. But the reason why we need to be saved is because of Adam's sin. And we remember to Genesis chapter 2. We talked about the 3 kinds of death. Spiritual death, physical death, and then eternal death. Well, when Adam ate from the fruit that God commanded him not to eat, he spiritually died, meaning that he was alienated, he was cut off from God. And that becomes paramount to understand because, let me get my little thing here since I'm going to do this. Remember I said, let's say that this represents God and his creation with God, and then all at the time of Genesis, 1 and 2, Adam is linked with God. He is alive. You can even say he is spiritually alive, in tune to God. And then God says, but he's living a natural life in the land. But Adam during this time, life was, to me, great. I can only imagine that life was good. Life was, when you think about life before sin, before the curse, it was great. In fact, we get a glimpse of it because Adam and Eve, they were walking around naked and not one realized it, but obviously the climate had to be so good that they could actually walk around and kind of enjoy. All right. But God commands Adam and says, don't eat of the tree. Now, on the day that you eat of the tree, you will surely die. Okay. Adam did eat of the tree, the fruit from the tree, and lived 930 years. So what did that mean then? Well, Adam died spiritually. And what happened when Adam ate from the fruit, he was cut off and he was alienated from God. So this is Adam and then ultimately mankind. So Adam was cut off from God. He started existing apart from God, apart from God. That's the difference. And so now when we talk about the sin nature results because man is a slave to sin because what? Man is living apart from God. He doesn't have any life, or he doesn't have the life of God, so he's cut off from God. So to answer, like I say, that Facebook, kind of the Facebook post was that even if you, and I think I answered it like this. I said, well, first of all, you first need to define what God says is sin, versus what you think is sin. And that's kind of where we are here to try to say, let's understand that the impact of sin, how bad sin is. So we kind of go back and we say, well, you start with God. That, remember, we are all creatures created by God. So everything that we see, God created. So it's his rules. It's God's rules because he created, just as I said, as you can kind of just look in the background here, right? This is my domain. I am sovereign here. If I wanted to, you see this phone here. If I wanted to take that phone and take it out, I can do that because it's sovereign. Everything within here is sovereign, right? If I want to take the book that's up there and rearrange the books, I can because I'm sovereign. You can't see right here. There's a desk. If I want to take the desk and turn it, I can because I'm sovereign here. My point is that all of creation is under the sovereignty of God, because he created all things. So our starting point then is what God has established. More on that in a moment. But remember, we operate by the standards that God sets, because all of this is his creation. God created. So all of this is God's creation. He created all things. We also now, as revealed by Scripture, that God is holy, God is perfect. And so according to God's standard, anything less than perfect is sin. So the word sin, remember the English word sin, means to miss the mark. Okay, so that's the idea, that it means to miss the mark. And so everything that falls short, and we're going to see this later on in the chapter, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now that statement there, meaning this: if you fall less than what God desires, if you fall short, then you miss the mark. We have this kind of illustration in Mark 11 where Jesus approaches a fig tree and he's looking for fruit and he doesn't find any fruit, and he curses the fig tree. Now that's kind of an interesting story, and that's also an analogy, because here it is. This tree did not commit an act other than not being what God created it, and so Jesus cursed it. And there are other illustrations from this, how when we look at how God views sin, and that's what I wanted you to see right here, how God views sin. Now, from a religious, and this is the worst, see, it is so easy for us to sanitize our own sin. So from hypocrisy, we do not look at sin, and we don't look at how God looks at our sin. Now, we certainly will say, and as I may quote this pastor years ago, he said, sin is what you do, but I don't. But yet when we go back to God's level, what God says is sin, okay, so that's the starting point. What does God say sin is? Because that's what matters. And from a holy, righteous, perfect God, anything less is sin. And we have to understand that, because the impact of that is what is seen. That the devastation that happened, that Adam brought to mankind, because when he ate of the fruit, because if you stop and you think about this, when Adam ate from the tree, why didn't God just forgive him? Now there's some who ask that, but why didn't God just forgive him? Why didn't God just say, okay, Adam, okay, look, this is your first time, and it was. Okay, you blew it, just don't do it again. Don't do it again. You understand? Don't eat of the tree. You understand that, Adam? Don't eat of the tree. Okay, y'all go on, run off. So why didn't God just forgive him? Well, it's because of what happened. So that's the first thing. What happened when he sinned? Death resulted in sin. See, death resulted in sin. That Adam had alienated his life, and then all of mankind, from God. This is the road to salvation. But I want to also just kind of again, reiterate just how bad sin is, how it works. And I said, one of the things is I never understand. I'm baffled, of course, by why Adam sinned. Now, in our case, we can sin. Our case, we can sin. Our natures is a sin nature. We sin because it is a part of our nature. When we talk about this sin, however, though, this, whatever we can call it, a force, something, right, that works in us. Now, Satan, the devil, the serpent, incites us. He incites us to sin. If there is no nature to sin, if we did not have a sin nature, then Satan could not incite us to sin. But that principle, that force, and we see it throughout the Bible. It is a main thread from Genesis to Revelation, a main thread. And when you read, especially the Old Testament, you will scratch your head because of the many times that Israel sinned. They would sin, they would fall into judgment, they would cry out for mercy, God would deliver them, they would turn right around, the next generation, sin again, all throughout Israel's history. We also see this thread throughout the book of Revelations, when in the last day, there's the 70th week of Daniel, when it all comes to that the sin will, Revelation kind of shows us how bad sin can get. And sometimes we see how people look at sin and we say, oh, I didn't mean it. And yet what we see in the book of Revelations is that they're going to come to a point, yeah, I mean it and I don't care. And then you're going to see how bad sin is when God is judging. Like the Revelations from chapter 6 on, from 6:19 is you see how God is judging the sinfulness of man. Those chapters, judging the sinfulness of man, and despite even them recognizing that God is judging them, do you know they pump their fists at God? Probably, I would say, giving him the middle finger. They actually will blaspheme. They actually will curse God. See, that's how bad sin is. And then we see in chapter 19, Jesus comes and he binds Satan for 1,000 years. He binds Satan for 1,000 years. And then you live, there's going to be 1,000 years of prosperity, justice, the deserts will bloom. That 1,000-year reign, things are going to be just fantastic. What is interesting is that there will be people who have sin natures. And so in Revelation chapter 20, just as if we were to go back now to Genesis chapter 3, so Genesis chapter 3, we know Satan incited Adam and then Eve to sin. Eve was deceived, but Adam made a choice. And that's why I say we kind of go back. What this sin principle, this force or whatever it is that made Adam sin. See, like I said, so now us now in post Adam, we have a sin nature that the same principle of sin works. The same prince of the power of the air incites us, corrals us to sin. And we say to ourselves, why do I sin? Right? You sin, and like the dirty rat that Satan is, he will incite you to sin and then turn around and load guilt on you for sinning. Right? So we see that. And then in Revelation chapter 20, we see after 1,000 years, Satan is let loose again. He goes throughout the earth inciting people to sin. And they fall for it. They will fall for it. They will come upon the camp of the saints in the sense to destroy them, and fire rains down from God and destroys them. So like I said, so the idea of what sin is, you have to understand just how bad sin is. This, as I said, I don't know if we can call it a force, something, and that works in us. That principle, whatever it is, that it works in us. Now, again, we also have to keep in mind that what we think maybe is not sin is not sin. For here's an example. In the law, let me pull up our what we call text. Okay, so here in Romans chapter 3, let's go to verse 9 again. He says, what then, are we any better? Not at all, for we have previously charged both Jews and Gentiles are all under sin. Now that it's written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. So this is well, what Paul is doing is stringing together several verses of scripture, but it also this is how God views man. There is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become useless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. Their throats are an open grave. They deceive with their tongues. Viper venom is under their lips. Their mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and wretchedness are in their path, and the path of peace they have not known. Okay? The path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So, let me give you an example again of, so you see God, how God looks at man, but let's kind of go back and let me show you again how God will view sin. Okay, in the law, this is a good example. Now we know about idolatry. Don't make golden calves that Israel did and worship them. That was a bad sin. If you read that, the golden calf incident was bad because here you see, and I think this golden calf incident happened about 3 months after Israel came out of Egypt. So in other words, it's not like it was years upon years. God had delivered them from 400 years of slavery, brutal slavery, cruel. They get out, and the first thing they start doing is complaining. I mean, it's from Jump Street with Israel, it just wasn't good. And Moses goes up in the mountain as he's receiving the 10 Commandments. Step back down, people are going, well, we don't know what's going on this Moses. So the kind of, we don't know what's going on with Moses. So the logic was, instead of saying, well, let's appoint another leader then. If you thought we don't know what's happened to Moses, all right, let's appoint another leader who's going to lead us in the way of God. That's not what they did. They said, well, let's make a golden calf to lead us back to Egypt. What? And then to add insult, they said, well, when they made the calf, they said, this calf is what delivered us from Egypt. And okay, so that was bad. That is bad. If homosexuality, adultery, drugs, murder, right? These are all bad sins, right? But let me show you one that we don't oftentimes think of as bad. In the law, now the law was commandments given. In other words, they were not suggestions. They were not goals to achieve, to reach for. Okay? They were commands. So in other words, whenever God tells you something, it is a command. And you don't sit up and say, well, God, I prefer not. Okay. Now people do, but that's sin. That's sin. So, there is a command where God says, now, okay, obviously, don't make any golden calf. That's bad, right? Don't commit adultery. Don't have premarital sex. Don't steal. Don't murder. And at the sidebar too, let me just say this too as a sidebar, because again, how man measures things right now in our religious culture, there are conservatives that they think God counts, for example, homosexuality, a worse sin than stealing. And by the way, it's all sin. But watch this. Let's go even further, because with this indictment that we just read right here, this indictment, and let me show you why. So in the law, God says that if you see your neighbor's ox or donkey, right? It wandered off, it got lost. You see the donkey wandering, you go, oh, wait a minute, I don't see the owner. So you conclude the beast must be lost. The law says, take the beast and keep it, care for it, and when your neighbor comes looking for it, you can go, here it is. Here's your beast. Here's your lost donkey, your ox, or whatever. And that's a command. Now, see, the reason I'm going to say this is because let's say you see your neighbor's donkey wandering around. So let's say a couple of things. Instead of doing as the law says, taking the donkey and securing it and keeping it until your neighbor comes look for it. Now, suppose you said, okay, I want to keep it for myself. Okay, I gain, Or let's say I'm just not going to do anything. I'm going to ignore, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to ignore. Now, here's the thing. You have just sinned. See? And we think, well, that's not a big, bad sin. Here is the problem. To God, that sin is bad. Because God is perfect. God's starting point is perfection. So anything less than perfection is bad. And that's the difference right here. It is bad. So the point that I'm driving home here is how we measure sin is different than how God measures sin, which means this is why you can never ever earn your way to heaven, because you don't have enough. You don't have it in you enough to ever meet God's standard. You can never, because this is why Jesus came along and really stared the point to us, right? Like the Pharisees would be like, okay, now Jesus talking, he's kind of eyeing the Pharisees, like, okay, well, you have heard, right? Don't commit adultery, right? They puff that shit up. No, I never committed. I never committed adultery. And then Jesus is like, well, let's talk about your porn. I mean, he didn't use those words, right? But here's what he did say. And you're going to say, okay, well, here's what he did say. So people may ask the question, well, can I watch porn? Well, understand, Jesus said that if you look upon a woman to lust after her, you have committed adultery. Now, understand that. Understand that, from a man's standpoint, Lord, it's summertime, right? Lord, it's summertime. So when Jesus said that, wow, right? He went to the heart, because remember, from God's standpoint, God God's method is different. God's standard is different. His standard is different, and understand that. So that's what I'm saying. So sin, and the whole point of this, see, sin from God's perspective is it is impossible for you not to sin according to God's standard. Remember, all Adam did was eat fruit. He didn't make an idol, right? He didn't go out and have sex with some of the animals, some of the disgusting things that pagans did. He ate fruit. That's all he did. But see the impact of that: when he ate the fruit, he was cut off from God. So now from Adam's standpoint, that Adam went from life to death, spiritual life to death. And of course, 930 years later, because of spiritual death, then physical death came, the corruption, the curse of the body was out and it died. And now, over time, during Adam's generation, these guys were living 900, 800, 700 years. Just kind of think about that. Think about Adam. If Adam was alive today in this timeline, Adam, would have been born in the 10th century, right? Around the 10th century. I mean, all that time he would have been living since that time. Okay, but now we see, and then as you read the first 5 chapters, and actually probably even, I think, up to even Abraham, you see the life shrinking. So you go from Adam in the 900s down to Abraham, the 200s. Jacob, I think he was 140 years old, I believe. I think then Joseph, I think, was 110, and to now we're our range 70 to 90, maybe a little, 100, like that, say around 100 years. But that's because of sin, the effect of sin. That's because of the effect of sin. And so, um, um, but now we go back to Why is the world the way it is? Because there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no good, right? This. So why is that? Because that sin nature. Let me just say this. Play around with some things here. Um, you know why Star Trek? Oh, that's my wrong one here. Why Star? Why like Star Trek? If it were possible, it's not. We can get into a whole lot of to me, a whole lot of the reasons why, you know, creation versus evolution. Not, but besides the fact that you can travel as far as you want, you know. By the way, it's interesting. You talk about space. That there are people that are willing to, let's say, travel to Mars or travel to Jupiter, and knowing that that's a one-way trip. There are people that there are star systems, right, that they can travel to. First of all, it would take they would have to be like in these science fictions. They would have to be put in these hypersleeps, you know. And which is interesting because again, you don't know without that there are so many people that's willing to do that. There's so many people that's willing to. There, there were people I think on there was a few years ago. There was somebody, some company I think it was that was trying to get money to make a craft that would go to, I think it was Mars. Okay, I think it was Mars. And people were signing up like crazy to the point that some people were even like, well, we're going to leave our families. Like, you know, wives saying, I'll leave my husband for this trip. Knowing this is a one-way trip. Okay, but I digress. Okay. I digress. But let me just say, but let's just say if like Star Trek and all that was real. Let me tell you why it can't happen. Because the way Star Trek presents the universe, okay, that there's all kinds of life forms, systems like that, you know, and there's no proof. People believe, but there's no proof. The further out they look, they never find it. But let's just say, even if that, you know, if you say that they're okay, let's just say, okay, well, that was true. The reason why it could never happen is because of the sinful nature of man. Why on earth here right now you will never have peace. You will never have peace because of the sinful nature of man. Man is always going to mess it up. And he's going to mess it up in favor of his sinful nature. And this is why we need the law. God put the law here because if we did not have the law, we would kill ourselves. If think about this, if we did not have the law, I'll confess to you that if we did not have the law, I always think that you should give me the right of way. I just think that if I'm driving down the street, I think all of the traffic lights should turn green for me. Of course, the problem with that is so does everybody else. So what do you have? Boom, accident. So now you have a right of way, green light, red light, and all of that. So the law was given to control. And think about this: even with the laws that we have, murder rate is still high, theft is still high, greed is still high. You know, we can go on and on and on, right? So, um, what this brings us to is how bad we are. Okay, so let me go back. What this brings us to is just how bad we are, how bad sin is. And right here, right, this is what you are. None righteous, none understands, none seeks God, all have become useless. There is no one that does good, not even one. That's what we are. That's when we talk about our sinful nature, this is the starting point. Now, this is when we say, our natures are sin. Does it mean that that everyone continuously does murder? No, we don't have the condition. Like I say, the law curbs sinfulness, lawlessness. Okay, the law curbs that. But when you go back to the flood in Genesis chapter 6, I got a couple more minutes. Let me do that. Let's see here. Um, in Genesis, the flood. Here we go. All right, let's read something here. Look at verse 5. It says, when the Lord saw that man's wickedness was widespread on the earth, now get this, and that every scheme his mind thought of was nothing but evil all the time. Now think about that. So you had the world at the time, and that, notice this, mankind upon the earth. So then he says, then the Lord said, I will wipe, verse 7, I will wipe off from the face of the earth mankind whom I created, together with the animals, creatures that crawl, and the birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. He says, nor have I found favor. Now, people may say, well, why was God so cruel? Or, and remember, I told you this is God's creation. So that's the first thing. This is God's creation. When he said, remember, I told you, if you look at my background right here, and I said, I say to you that I could do what I will because it's mine. Well, here God is saying, I'm going to wipe out man because what? This is his earth. These are his creatures. He can do what he wants. So that's the first thing. But notice why he's doing it. Because of what? The wickedness of man, verse 5 again, the wickedness of man was widespread on the earth, and that every scheme of his mind thought of was nothing but evil all the time. All the time. This is how bad sin got. And notice, it got bad quick. Right? So if you kind of go back from the time of Adam to Moses, to Noah, somewhere around a 1500 to 2000 year reign. And already man was so bad, God says, we need to do something about them. Okay? Yeah, we need to do something about them. That they were so bad that we need to do something about that. Their wickedness, they are wicked, bad people. So that's the starting point. So when we say, what do we say for? We're saved from the wrath of God, but we're saved from the sinful nature, the wretched nature that causes us to deserve the wrath of God. And this is why you cannot earn your way to heaven, work your way to heaven, do good enough deeds. Because you see, You may say, I'm doing these things, but what about your thoughts? All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. Our comments are welcome. And I will see you next Friday night.